The steam rising from the tin cup caught the first pale light of dawn, November 19th, 1944. 264 meters away, through the shattered remnants of what had once been called the Hurtgen Forest, Staff Sergeant William Garrison centered the crosshairs of his Springfield 03A4 rifle on something no German would expect an American marksman to target. Not the gunner feeding the belt into the MG-42 machine gun, not the loader crouched beside him, hands working with practiced efficiency, not even the team leader directing their setup, pointing toward the American advance route half a mile distant. Will's finger rested against the trigger. Through the scope, magnified 4 times, he watched the German crew work with the efficiency of men who'd done this 1,000 times before. The MG-42 sat ready to turn the American advance into a slaughter. 2,400 rounds loaded, 1,200 rounds per minute fire rate, 40 American casualties minimum before artillery could silence it. One bullet remained in Will's rifle, one M2 armor-piercing round, last cartridge from a box opened 6 days ago when the coffee cup trick was just an idea instead of a legend. His crosshairs drifted past the Germans to something beside them, the ammunition box. The solution crystallized in his mind with the clarity of Montana winter air. He wasn't shooting the men, he was shooting their ammunition. The wind gusted across the killing field, 8 to 12 miles per hour, variable direction. Will watched vegetation at 3 different distances, calculating the average. The light was fading. 1443 hours in November in Germany. Shadows stretched long across broken earth. His breath formed small clouds. He exhaled slowly, let half the air escape his lungs, then held. Not the full exhale they'd taught him at Fort Benning. That was doctrine. This was Montana. Will's finger applied smooth pressure. 1.5 seconds of trigger pull instead of the regulation 3 to 4. Another modification to Army doctrine. Another way to win by refusing expectations. The Springfield kicked, 2.3 seconds of flight time. The M2 armor-piercing round struck the ammunition box 3 inches left of center. Physics and chemistry negotiated in the language of violence. The ammunition box exploded. Sharp, brutal detonation as linked rounds cooked off in rapid succession. Metal container became shrapnel. All 3 Germans died before their nervous systems could process pain. The MG-42 twisted beyond repair. Will lowered the rifle, reached for the notebook in his jacket pocket, made the final entry in handwriting that didn't waver. November 19, 1443 hours. Kills, number 95, 96, 97. Range, 264 meters. Wind, variable 8 to 12 miles per hour. Temperature, 23 Fahrenheit. Target, ammunition box. Result, explosion, 3 killed in action, weapon destroyed, mission complete. He closed the notebook, put it back in his pocket, sat there for a moment, Springfield across his lap, looking at 3 bodies sprawled around destroyed weapon. 97 men in 6 days. The number sat in his mind like a stone at the bottom of a well. 97 Germans who'd followed training and died for it. 97 men who'd made the mistake of focusing on tin cups while Will Garrison watched them from somewhere else. Time to go home. The problem with war, Will Garrison had discovered, was that it made you think about all the moments before the war when you could have been someone different. November 13th, 1944, 1800 hours, the Hurtgen Forest, Germany. Will sat in a foxhole that was more mud than hole, cleaning his Springfield rifle for the 3rd time that day, and thought about Montana. Specifically, he thought about winter of 1936, about being 15 years old, about hunting coyotes with his father in weather that would kill a man who didn't respect it. His father had been a veteran of the Great War, Meuse Argonne, and he had opinions about hunting developed in trenches where the prey shot back. They'd been standing on a ridge above Cascade Ridge, Montana, population 421, watching Will track a coyote through snow that came up to the boy's knees. Temperature was 30 below zero. Wind cut through clothing with personal malice. Will had followed coyote prints for 2 hours, patient and methodical, doing exactly what he'd been taught. His father had let him track for another hour before calling him back. "You're working too hard," the old man had said. "Spending too much energy. In weather like this, that'll kill you dead as any bullet." "But I'm following the rules," Will had protested. "Doing it right. Rules are for people who want to come in second." His father had pulled out his Winchester, settled down behind a fallen log, and waited. Just waited. 20 minutes, 30, an hour. The coyote had come to them, circled back, curious about the human scent, wondering what these strange creatures were doing sitting still in its territory. By the time it realized its mistake, Will's father had already put a bullet through its chest at 400 yards. "Best hunting isn't about chasing prey, son," his father had said, field dressing the coyote with practiced efficiency. "It's about understanding what prey wants, then giving it to them. Let them come to you." Will had nodded, 15 years old and thinking he understood. Now, 8 years later, sitting in German mud with a rifle across his knees, he actually did understand. You didn't hunt Germans by looking for them. You made them look for something else. Then you killed them while they were looking. "Garrison!" Will looked up. Captain Robert Thatcher was making his way between foxholes, moving with the careful gait of a man who'd learned that in the Hurtgen, you never knew when a tree burst would send splinters the size of javelins through anyone standing upright. Thatcher was 35, which made him ancient by infantry standards. He'd been a high school history teacher in Pennsylvania before the war. Now he taught young men how to stay alive in a forest that was trying very hard to kill them all. "Sir," Will said, not bothering to stand. "In the Hurtgen, nobody stood unless they had to." 8 confirmed kills today, Thatcher said. It wasn't a question. The captain kept track of such things. "That makes 34 since we entered this green hell. You're becoming our leading scorer." "Yes, sir." "You're also becoming predictable." Thatcher settled down beside the foxhole, careful not to silhouette himself against what passed for sky in this perpetually twilight forest. "Germans are smart. They'll figure out your patterns. When they do, you'll be the one getting shot." Will considered this. Thatcher wasn't wrong. He'd been using traditional sniper tactics. Find a hide, wait for targets, take the shot, displace, repeat. It worked, but it was exactly what the German snipers were doing. Which meant it was a fair fight. And fair fights were for people who wanted to die proud instead of live humble. "Been thinking about that, sir," Will said. "Thinking what?" "That maybe I'm following rules that don't work here. Maybe there's a different way." Thatcher studied him with the look of a teacher who'd just heard a student say something interesting. "Go on." "Germans are good soldiers. They follow doctrine. Patient, methodical, careful. That's their strength." "It is, but what if we used their strength against them? Made them think they saw something worth targeting, got them focused on it, then killed them while they were concentrating on the wrong thing?" Thatcher was quiet for a moment. Somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbled. Tree bursts cracked and echoed. Men screamed, the usual symphony of the Hurtgen. "That's not in the manual," Thatcher finally said. "No, sir, but manuals don't account for coyotes." "Coyotes?" "Smart predators that learn from mistakes. You can't hunt them straight. Have to make them think they're hunting you." Thatcher almost smiled. Almost. Nobody smiled much in the Hurtgen. "You have something specific in mind?" "Working on it, sir." The captain stood careful and slow. "Work fast. We've lost 12 men to German snipers in the past week. I need you killing them faster than they're killing us." After Thatcher left, Will went back to cleaning his rifle, but his mind was elsewhere. Somewhere between Montana in 1936 and Germany in 1944. Somewhere in the space where tactics and innovation and desperation met and made something new. The answer came to him an hour later, delivered by Private First Class Daniel Kovac. Danny was 19 years old from Pittsburgh, and he'd been assigned as Will's spotter 3 weeks earlier. He was young enough that his face still looked surprised when people shot at him, and earnest enough that Will had grown protective of him in the way older brothers protected younger ones who didn't know any better. Danny came sliding into the foxhole with 2 canteen cups of coffee, both steaming in the cold air. He handed one to Will and kept the other for himself. "Got the good stuff from supply," Danny said. Real coffee, not that chicory garbage. Will accepted the cup, wrapped his cold hands around it, felt the heat seep into his fingers. The smell alone was worth whatever Danny had traded for it. Coffee in the Herdgen was currency, comfort and religion all wrapped into one tin cup. Danny settled in, took a sip, then set his cup down on the edge of the foxhole while he pulled out a chocolate bar from his jacket. The cup sat there, steam rising in lazy spirals, visible against the dark forest background. 50 meters away, a German machine gun opened fire. Will and Danny both dropped flat as bullets chewed through the air above their heads, stitching a line across the trees. The burst lasted maybe 3 seconds, then silence. When they looked up, Danny's coffee cup was gone. A bullet had hit it dead center, sent it spinning away into the mud. Coffee splattered across the foxhole wall. "Son of a bitch," Danny said, staring at the mud where his coffee had been. "They shot my coffee." Will stared at the same spot, but he wasn't seeing spilled coffee. He was seeing something else entirely, seeing the solution to a problem he'd been working on for hours. "They saw the steam," Will said slowly, "thought someone was sitting there drinking it, so they shot at the cup instead of looking for us." "Yeah, so?" "So they shot at what they thought was there, instead of what actually was there." Will's mind was racing now, pieces falling into place with the satisfying click of a rifle bolt closing. They saw something obvious, something their training told them meant an American position, so they acted on training without thinking about whether it might be deliberate. Danny was starting to catch on. "You want to do that on purpose?" Will reached into his pack, pulled out his own tin cup, turned it over in his hands, examining it like he'd never seen one before. "What if we positioned a cup where Germans would see it? Made them think they'd spotted a careless American? Got them so focused on one spot that they never looked at the spot we're actually shooting from?" Danny's eyes went wide. "That's either brilliant or insane."
"Won't know until we try." "When do we start?"
Will looked at his watch. 18:43 hours. Full dark in 20 minutes. The Germans wouldn't move at night. Nobody moved at night in the Herdgen unless they were lost or suicidal. "Tomorrow morning," he said, 0500 hours. "I'll need you spotting for me, calling wind, watching for movement while I'm focused on the scope." "I'm in." Danny hesitated. "Captain Thatcher going to approve this?" "Captain Thatcher said I'm becoming predictable. This is me being unpredictable." "Fair enough." Danny started to climb out of the foxhole, then paused. "Garrison, you really think this will work?" Will thought about Montana, about his father, about coyotes that were smart enough to avoid obvious hunters but curious enough to investigate obvious bait, about German soldiers who were brave and skilled and well-trained, which meant they'd been taught exactly what to look for and exactly how to respond when they found it.
"Yeah," he said.
"I think it'll work. They're good soldiers, they follow good training. Sometimes the best way to beat good training is to use it backwards." Danny nodded and disappeared into the darkness. Will sat in his foxhole, tin cup in his hands, and began planning the next 6 days. He had no way of knowing, in that moment, that he was about to kill 97 men, terrify an entire German division, force a change in Wehrmacht doctrine, and turn a simple coffee cup into the most feared object in the Herdgen forest. All he knew was that tomorrow morning he was going to try something different, something that would bring the prey to him. November 14th, 1944, 04:45 hours. Will Garrison moved through the pre-dawn darkness with the careful silence of a man who understood that sound traveled further in cold air. Danny Kovac followed 3 steps behind, equally quiet, carrying the equipment they'd assembled the night before. 3 tin cups, each one with small holes drilled near the rim, wire loops threaded through. A small camping stove, the kind that could burn fuel tablets and produce steady heat for hours. A dozen fuel tablets, slightly dampened to make them smoke more, and Will's Springfield 03A4 rifle, serial number 3172418, zeroed at 180 meters, and ready to prove whether Montana ingenuity could beat German training. They moved to a position Will had scouted the previous evening. A slight rise, good sight lines across 200 meters of broken forest, multiple German approach routes visible. A fallen log provided natural cover for the coffee cup decoy. His actual firing position was 72 yards to the left, elevated enough to see over the log, concealed enough that German counter-snipers would have to be looking directly at him to spot him. The key was making sure they never looked directly at him, making sure they looked at the coffee cup instead.
Danny helped Will position cup number 1 on the fallen log.
They used small sticks to prop it at a natural angle, the way a soldier might set down his coffee while he scanned the enemy tree line. They placed the camping stove just behind the log, hidden from German view, but positioned so the heat would rise through the cup and create visible steam. Will dampened a fuel tablet and lit it. The tablet caught, burned slow and steady, produced a thin column of smoke that rose through the cup and emerged as steam in the cold morning air. From 200 meters away, it would look exactly like a soldier drinking hot coffee behind cover. Will moved to his actual firing position, settled prone behind a cluster of shattered trees, arranged his rifle, checked the scope. The crosshairs centered perfectly on the area around the coffee cup. Any German sniper who set up to shoot at the cup would have to expose himself in Will's field of fire.
Danny positioned himself 2 yards to Will's right, binoculars ready.
His job was to watch for movement, call wind conditions, help Will spot targets before they spotted the trick. "Wind's light," Danny whispered. 3 to 5 miles per hour, left to right. "Copy." Will's voice was barely audible. He pulled out his notebook, made the first entry of the day. November 14, 0500 hours. Coffee cup positioned. Beginning operation. The eastern sky was starting to lighten. Not sunrise yet, but the promise of it. The kind of pre-dawn grey that turned forests into collections of shadows and shapes. Perfect visibility for snipers. Perfect conditions for killing. The coffee cup sat on the log, steam rising in a steady column. Visible. Obvious. Exactly what German training would teach soldiers to look for. They waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. 15. Will controlled his breathing, slow and steady. His finger rested outside the trigger guard. He'd learned long ago that anticipation made fingers tense, and tense fingers pulled shots left. Stay relaxed. Stay patient. 20 minutes. Movement, Danny breathed. 11 o'clock. 200 meters. Tree line. Will shifted slightly, peered through the scope. Saw nothing at first. Then a shape resolved itself from the shadows. A German soldier, moving carefully, settling into a position that offered a good view of the American lines. Through the scope at 4-power magnification, Will could see him clearly. Young face, maybe 25. Careful movements. He was setting up behind a cluster of broken trees, arranging equipment with the methodical efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. The German pulled out binoculars, started scanning the American positions. The binoculars paused on the coffee cup. Will felt his heartbeat slow, felt the world narrow to the circle of his scope,
Felt Montana and Germany and 8 years of life fold together into this one moment.
The German stared at the cup through his binoculars. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5, 10. Will watched him watching, patient as stone. The German was following doctrine. Observe extensively before acting. Confirm the target. Calculate range. Account for wind. Take no chances. Good training. Excellent training. Training that had kept him alive through God knew how many battles. Training that was about to get him killed. 17 minutes after he'd first spotted the coffee cup, the German lowered his binoculars, reached for his rifle, a Karabiner 98 Kurz, the standard Wehrmacht sniper rifle. Good weapon, accurate, reliable. The German settled the rifle against his shoulder, peered through iron sights, centered them on the area just below where the coffee cup rested on the log. At this range, approximately 180 meters, he couldn't miss. A soldier drinking coffee behind that log would die before he knew he'd been targeted. Will centered his crosshairs on the German's chest. 180 meters, wind 3 to 5 miles per hour, left to right. Temperature, maybe 25 degrees. No elevation compensation needed. The German controlled his breathing, applied pressure to the carabiner's trigger. Will's finger slipped inside the trigger guard, found the familiar curve of metal, applied smooth, steady pressure. The German fired. Will fired in the same instant. The German's bullet struck the coffee cup dead center, sent it spinning backward, coffee spraying in an arc that caught the morning light. Will's bullet struck the German in the center of his chest. 30-06 M1 ball ammunition, 172 grains, 2,800 feet per second.
At 180 meters, it hit with enough force to punch through coat, uniform, flesh, ribs, and vital organs before exiting through his back. The German never saw the coffee cup he'd destroyed, never knew he'd been tricked, never had time to understand that while he'd been shooting at bait, someone else had been shooting at him. He fell backward and was still. Through the scope, Will watched for movement, saw none. The German lay sprawled in the position that would become familiar over the next 6 days. Will lowered the rifle. His hands were steady. He reached for his notebook, made an entry in handwriting that didn't shake. November 14, 05:42 hours. Kill number 1. Range 180 meters. Wind 3 to 5 miles per hour, left to right. Center mass hit. Immediate casualty. Theory confirmed. Danny was staring at him with something like awe. Holy shit, Garrison. It worked. Yeah. Will's voice was flat, professional. He was already thinking about the next iteration. Reset the cup. Same position. I want to try it again. The Germans are going to figure it out. Eventually, but not today. Danny moved to retrieve cup number 1, replace it on the log, restart the camping stove. Will remained in position, scanning through his scope, looking for the next German who would see steam rising and make the last mistake of his life. The eastern sky grew lighter. The Hurtgen forest woke to another day of killing, and somewhere in the German lines, soldiers who'd heard a single rifle shot but seen no results continued with their morning routines, unaware that the rules of engagement had just changed, unaware that an American from Montana had just weaponized their own training against them. The coffee cup sat on the log, steam rising in the cold morning air. Will Garrison settled behind his scope and waited. By 08:33 hours, the coffee cup had claimed its second victim. A German soldier, sent to investigate the death of the first, moving cautiously through the sector where his comrade had died, made the same calculation his predecessor had made, saw steam rising from behind a log, concluded American position, methodically set up his rifle, prepared to take the shot that would eliminate what appeared to be a careless enemy. Never fired. Will's bullet arrived first, 196 meters. Wind had picked up slightly, 4 to 6 miles per hour, requiring a half-click adjustment on the scope. The German folded like a puppet with cut strings, his rifle falling from nerveless fingers. 2 kills in less than 3 hours. Will made the notation in his notebook with mechanical precision, his handwriting as steady as if he were recording weather observations instead of human deaths. Temperature, range, wind speed and direction, target behavior, result. Each entry identical in format, different only in the specific numbers that marked how another human being had stopped existing. Danny Kovac crouched beside him, binoculars pressed to his face, scanning the German sectors. "They're going to catch on," he said, not for the first time. He'd said it after the first kill, and he'd say it again after the third. "They have to. Nobody's that stupid." Maybe. Will repositioned cup number 1, moving it 40 yards to the northeast, to a different fallen log. Changed the angle slightly, made it look like a different American soldier had made a different careless mistake. But not yet. They're still following training. Training says when you see steam, when you see evidence of enemy presence, you target it. They haven't adapted yet. How do you know? Because the second one came looking for the first one. If they understood it was a trap, they wouldn't keep investigating. They'd call in artillery, saturate the whole area. But they're not doing that. They're trying to understand what's happening by sending individuals. That's doctrine. That's what training teaches them to do. And they didn't adapt. By noon on November 14th, 7 Germans had died the same way, each one following doctrine, each one methodically observing the coffee cup, calculating range and wind, preparing their shot with the patient professionalism that German training emphasized, each one doing exactly what their training had taught them to do,
when they spotted an obvious target. Each one proving that good training could work in reverse, could become a liability when facing someone who understood how to exploit it. Will's notebook filled with entries. Kill 3 at 09:15. Kill 4 at 10:02. Kill 5 at 10:47. The handwriting never wavered, the format never changed. Just numbers climbing steadily, marking the transformation of an idea into a body count, of a theory into a proven method. But something else was happening too. A pattern Will noticed and recorded in his notes. The Germans were taking longer to commit to their shots. That first soldier had observed for 17 minutes before firing. The third had taken 22 minutes. The fifth, 28 minutes. The seventh had watched for almost half an hour, binoculars moving between the coffee cup and the surrounding terrain, clearly suspicious, clearly trying to understand what he was seeing, but ultimately unable to resist the target. They were learning, slowly, cautiously, but learning nonetheless. The word was spreading through the German lines. Something strange was happening in this sector, something that didn't quite make sense. Will categorized them in his notebook, creating a taxonomy of German sniper behavior. Type A shooters, quick decisions, 5 to 10 minutes of observation. Usually younger soldiers, nervous or inexperienced. They saw the target and acted fast, afraid of losing the opportunity, afraid that hesitation meant the American would disappear. Type B shooters, methodical, 15 to 25 minutes of observation. These were the trained soldiers, the ones who'd survived long enough to develop patience. They followed doctrine precisely, observed extensively, calculated carefully. Their professionalism made them predictable. Type C shooters, paranoid, 30 minutes or more of observation, sometimes never firing at all. These were the dangerous ones. The veterans who'd seen too much combat, who'd developed instincts that superseded training, who'd learned that things that seemed too good to be true usually were. They were harder to fool and harder to kill. By 1400 hours, Will had recorded 12 kills. 12 Germans who would never go home to their families. 12 families who would receive letters with phrases like, "died bravely," and "in service to the fatherland," but would never know the truth, that their sons and brothers and fathers had died staring at a tin cup of coffee while a man from Montana shot them from somewhere else. Captain Thatcher arrived at 14:30, moving low and careful through the broken forest. He settled into the hide beside Will, studied the killing ground through his own binoculars, observed the bodies of dead Germans scattered across the sector, then looked at the notebook open beside Will's rifle. 12 confirmed, Thatcher said. It wasn't a question. He'd been counting the shots, listening to the rhythm of Will's rifle throughout the morning. With coffee cups. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen the bodies myself. Yes, sir. I also wouldn't have believed the Germans would fall for it this many times. Thatcher lowered his binoculars, turned to look at Will directly. But they are. They're still falling for it, which means you're onto something here. They're following training, sir. Good training. Training that works in most situations. They just don't know how to adapt when someone uses that training against them. The Germans are starting to figure it out, though. Look. Thatcher gestured toward the tree line. Through his scope, Will saw a German squad approaching the area where Cup number 2 was positioned. But they weren't approaching directly, weren't moving with the confidence of men who knew what they were doing. They were moving from an unexpected angle, weapons ready, advancing like men who suspected a trap, but weren't sure what kind of trap or where it was. They found the last cup, Danny said, watching through his binoculars. They're investigating. Will held fire, watching through his scope. The Germans reached Cup number 2's position. One of them, an older soldier, probably an NCO, picked up the coffee cup, turned it over in his hands, examined the wire loops Will had threaded through the holes, looked around nervously at the surrounding forest, trying to understand what he was holding and what it meant. Showed the cup to his squad mates, gesturing at it, clearly arguing something. Their confusion was visible even at 200 meters. They'd found a cup, a camping stove, clear evidence of an American position. But no American, no body, No blood. No sign of occupation beyond the bait itself, just equipment that had been deliberately placed and then abandoned. One soldier pointed at the cup, his body language suggesting heated argument. Another gestured at the tree line where Will was hidden, then at other potential firing positions, trying to calculate where the American might actually be. A third shook his head emphatically, looked around with the paranoid awareness of a man who just realized he was standing in a kill zone and couldn't figure out where the killer was hiding. They withdrew quickly, covering each other, moving with the hasty caution of men who understood they'd just encountered something outside their experience, something their training hadn't prepared them for. "They know it's a trick," Thatcher said, watching them go. "They just don't know how the trick works yet. Don't know what it means or how to counter it." "No, sir, but they will, eventually. They're smart. They'll figure it out, adapt their procedures, warn other units. I'd give it 2 more days, maybe 3, before this stops working." "How long do you think you have before they adapt completely?" Will thought about coyotes in Montana, how they learned from mistakes, how you could fool a coyote once, maybe twice, but never the same way 3 times. How predators and prey were locked in an evolutionary arms race, each adaptation forcing a counter-adaptation, each trick requiring a new trick. 2 more days, he said. "Maybe 3 if we're—" Thatcher stood to leave, careful not to silhouette himself against the sky. "Try to make it the former, Garrison. We need you alive more than we need you dead and revolutionary." After the captain left, Will and Danny settled in for the afternoon watch. The coffee cup sat in its new position, steam rising steadily. The forest waited, patient and cold. And somewhere in the German lines, soldiers who'd heard about the Kaffeesatzteufel, the coffee cup devil, as they were starting to call the American sniper, tried to decide whether the stories were real or just another piece of war mythology, growing in the dark spaces between truth and terror. By evening on November 14th, Will's notebook recorded 12 kills, 12 Germans who'd followed training and died for it. 12 small victories in a war of attrition where small victories were the only kind anyone could hope for. He cleaned his rifle as darkness fell, breaking it down completely, checking every component. Danny heated rations over a small fire that wouldn't be visible beyond 20 meters. They ate in silence, 2 soldiers who'd spent the day killing men they'd never met, for reasons that seemed increasingly abstract the longer this forest refused to give up its grip on them. "Think it'll work again tomorrow?" Danny asked between bites of tasteless stew. "Yeah, for a while." Will wiped down the Springfield's barrel with an oiled cloth, checked the bore for fouling. "Then we'll have to get creative, change the method, stay ahead of them." "More creative than using coffee cups to kill people." "Different creative. Same principle, different application." Danny was quiet for a moment, chewing mechanically. Then, in the voice of someone who'd been thinking about this for hours, "Garrison? Do you ever think about them? The Germans you're killing?" Will's hands paused on the rifle, just for a moment, then resumed their methodical work. "No." "No?" "Can't afford to. They're not people when I'm looking at them through the scope. They're problems that need solving, targets that need eliminating. The moment I start thinking of them as people, as men with families and hopes and fears, I stop being able to do the job. And if I stop being able to do the job, Americans die instead. That's the trade." "That doesn't bother you?" "It bothers me at night." Will reassembled the rifle, checked the action, made sure everything was functioning smoothly. "But during the day, when I'm behind the scope, they're just Germans, just enemy soldiers who'd kill me and Danny and Captain Thatcher and every other American in this forest if we gave them the chance. That's enough. That has to be enough." Danny nodded slowly, 19 years old and learning how to live with killing, how to compartmentalize, how to build walls in your mind between the man who pulled triggers during the day and the man who had to sleep at night. Will finished cleaning the rifle, set it carefully aside, pulled out his notebook, made notes for tomorrow, new cup positions, different timing sequences, variations in the pattern, ways to stay one step ahead of German adaptation. The coffee cup trick was working, but it wouldn't work forever. Nothing ever did. The key was to evolve faster than the enemy could learn. He fell asleep thinking about Montana, about his father's voice, about coyotes and patience, and the thin line between hunting and murder, about whether there was any difference when the prey was human and the hunting ground was called a war. November 15th dawned cold and grey, the same as every dawn in the Hurtgen. Will was in position by 0530, cup number 3, positioned in a new location, this one partially concealed behind a small rise, as if an American soldier had tried, but failed to hide his morning coffee completely. The partially concealed version worked even better than the obvious placement. Germans saw it, thought they'd discovered something the American had attempted to hide, and became even more committed to the target. The psychology was perfect. People trust their own observations more when they think they've discovered something rather than being shown something. Kill 13 came at 0715. Type B shooter, methodical observation for 22 minutes, then a careful setup for the shot he'd never take. Dead at 194 meters. Kill 14 at 0841. Type A shooter, nervous and quick, lasted only 8 minutes before committing to the shot. Will's bullet found him at 212 meters. By noon, Will had added 12 more Germans to his tally, 24 total in less than 36 hours. The coffee cup trick was working with the mechanical efficiency of a factory assembly line. German soldiers in one end, corpses out the other, nothing but Will Garrison and his Springfield in between. But the Germans were adapting faster than Will had expected. At 1800 hours, as the light was beginning to fail, Will spotted something new through his scope. Germans were positioning their own decoys now. Helmets carefully placed on sticks, pieces of equipment arranged to look carelessly positioned. Obvious targets meant to draw American fire and reveal American sniper positions. Danny saw them too. They're using our trick against us, trying to bait us the way we're baiting them. Yeah. Will studied the German decoys through his scope, analyzing them with professional interest. They were good, professional work, exactly what doctrine would prescribe for counter-sniper operations. But they made a mistake. What mistake? They made them too clean, too perfect. Will shifted his scope to scan the areas around the German decoys, looking for the observers who would be watching them. Real positions have supporting details, disturbed vegetation from soldiers moving through, footprints in the mud, discarded ration tins, cigarette butts, scattered equipment. These German decoys are too military, too precise. They look like what training says a position should look like, not what a real position actually looks like. So, we ignore them? No. Will smiled, small and cold. We use them. When Germans set up decoys, they have to watch those decoys from nearby positions. They're hoping we'll take the bait and shoot at the obvious targets, revealing our muzzle flash and position. Which means while they're watching their decoys, while they're focused on waiting for us to make a mistake, they're exposing themselves to observation. You're going to shoot the watchers? I'm going to shoot the watchers. Over the next 3 hours, as darkness crept across the forest, Will killed 4 Germans who were observing their own decoys. Men who'd thought they were the hunters suddenly became the hunted. Men who'd set traps found themselves caught in larger traps they hadn't seen. Kill 25 at 1900 hours. German sniper positioned 30 meters behind his own helmet decoy, watching through a scope for American muzzle flash that would never come from the expected direction. Never saw Will's bullet coming from 231 meters away, from an angle he hadn't considered. Kill 26 at 1945. German officer using binoculars to scan the American lines, trying to spot snipers by watching for reactions to his carefully placed decoys. Took Will's round through the upper chest at 177 meters. By the time full darkness made further sniping impossible, Will had recorded 28 confirmed kills in 48 hours. The notebook was filling up. The Springfield was getting hot from repeated firing, and somewhere in the German headquarters, someone was starting to ask very serious questions about the American sniper who seemed to be everywhere and nowhere, who killed with the precision of a machine and the creativity of something far more dangerous than any machine could be. November 16th began with fog. Thick, cold, clinging fog that reduced visibility to 50 meters and made long-range sniping nearly impossible. Will sat in his hide and waited for conditions to improve, rifle ready, eyes scanning the limited field of view his scope provided through the murk. At 0600 hours, 3 Germans entered his sector. They moved with professional discipline, weapons ready, clearly searching for something specific. The lead man was older than the typical Wehrmacht soldier, maybe 30, moving with the confidence and caution of someone who'd survived the Eastern Front and knew exactly how dangerous a competent enemy could be. Hauptmann Otto Richter. Will didn't know the name yet, wouldn't learn it until after the war, from captured German documents that detailed the deployment of experienced counter-sniper teams to deal with the Kaffeesatzteufel. But he recognized the type immediately through his scope. Type C shooter, dangerous, patient, thinking instead of just following training. Richter spotted cup number 8, positioned at 0530 on a fallen log 200 meters from Will's hide. He studied it through binoculars for a full minute, his body language suggesting intense concentration. Then he lowered the binoculars and began scanning the surrounding terrain in a methodical pattern, sector by sector, looking for anything that didn't belong. He was looking for Will. "He knows," Danny whispered, so quietly Will barely heard him. "He knows it's a trap. He's not taking the bait." "Yeah." Will kept his crosshairs centered on Richter's position, but the German never exposed himself to a clear shot, never gave Will the opportunity he needed, just observed from behind solid cover, patient as death, trying to solve the puzzle of the coffee cup. An hour passed. Richter didn't move from his position, didn't fire at the coffee cup, didn't commit to anything, just watched and thought and tried to understand what he was seeing. His spotter crouched beside him, also scanning with binoculars. His security man, a third soldier, maintained overwatch on their position, watching for threats from unexpected directions. Professional, disciplined, smart. "He's too smart," Danny said after 90 minutes of stalemate. "He's not going to take the bait. He knows something's wrong." Will thought about Montana, about coyotes that learn from the mistakes of other coyotes, about how you had to change tactics when the prey adapted, when the old tricks stopped working, about his father's voice saying that the best hunters were the ones who could improvise, who could change their approach when circumstances demanded it. "Then I need different bait," Will said. "Need to make him look at something else." He studied the terrain through his scope, analyzing sight lines and cover and fields of fire. Richter was positioned behind excellent cover, scanning slowly and carefully, looking for any sign of Will's actual position. His spotter was doing the same from a slightly different angle, giving them overlapping fields of observation. Both men were completely focused on the task, their attention fixed on finding the American sniper before the American sniper found them, which meant they weren't watching everything. Will reached into his pack, pulled out a length of paracord he'd been carrying since entering the Hurtgen, tied one end to a low branch approximately 40 yards from the coffee cup, running the cord through the undergrowth, keeping it low and invisible against the forest floor, ran the cord all the way back to his position, a distance of almost 100 yards. Tied the other end to his belt. "What are you doing?" Danny asked, watching him work. "Creating a different kind of mistake, something he won't expect." Will shifted slightly in his position, careful not to create any visible movement. Applied gentle pressure to the paracord. 40 yards away, barely visible through the fog, the branch moved. Just a small movement, natural looking, exactly like a soldier had accidentally brushed against it while shifting position to get more comfortable. Through his scope, Will watched Richter's reaction. The German's binoculars snapped toward the movement immediately. His spotter shifted focus to the same area. For approximately 3 seconds, Will counted them. 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000. Both Germans were looking at the wrong thing, trying to determine if the movement was natural or human, threat or false alarm. 3 seconds was enough. Will fired. 231 meters. Upper chest hit. The bullet struck Richter just below the collarbone, punched through his chest cavity, collapsed a lung, severed major blood vessels. Richter jerked backward violently, rifle falling from his hands. A look of surprise crossing his face in the instant before pain and shock overwhelmed everything else. His spotter, Unteroffizier Wilhelm Adler, though Will would never learn that name, reacted with impressive speed, swung his rifle toward the sound of Will's shot, toward the muzzle flash that had given away Will's position. fired 3 rapid shots that went wide, hitting trees and dirt but nothing human.
Will was already displacing, rolling left behind better cover, chambering another round, finding a new firing position. Adler kept firing, but he was shooting at where Will had been, not where Will was. The third German, the security man, joined in, spraying bullets in approximately the right direction, but without the precision required to hit anything. Through the chaos of gunfire and shouting, Will watched Richter die, watched the life leave a man who'd been good enough to survive Stalingrad and Kursk and every other hell the Eastern Front had produced, but not good enough to survive one Montana ranch hand with a coffee cup and a piece of paracord. Kill 29. Adler and the security man dragged Richter's body away, moving fast, covering each other with professional discipline, leaving bloody drag marks in the mud that would still be visible hours later. We'll let them go. He'd made his point. He'd killed their best counter-sniper. He'd proven that even German veterans with years of combat experience couldn't adapt fast enough when the tactics kept evolving. Jesus Christ, Danny breathed, his young face pale. That was close, Garrison. That was really close. Yeah. He almost had you. Another minute, and he would have figured out where you were hiding. Almost doesn't count. But Will's hands were shaking slightly as he reloaded, as he settled back into his primary position. Richter had been good, better than good, professional in a way that demanded respect. Another minute of observation, and he might have spotted something that gave Will away. Might have called in artillery to saturate the entire area. Might have ended the coffee cup trick before it became legend. Close only counted in horseshoes and hand grenades, but it counted there very well. By evening on November 16th, Will had recorded 29 kills. 29 Germans who'd woken up that morning thinking they'd survive the day. 29 families who would receive telegrams in the coming weeks, telegrams that would destroy their worlds with a few typed sentences. Captain Thatcher visited again at dusk, moving carefully through the forest. "I'm hearing things from intelligence," he said without preamble. "German radio chatter. Prisoners we've interrogated. They're calling you Kaffeesatzteufel." What does that mean? Coffee cup devil. Thatcher settled into the hide beside Will, keeping his voice low. "They're terrified, Garrison. Not just of you personally, of the idea of you. They don't know how many American snipers are using this technique. They don't know if every coffee cup is a trap. They're starting to see threats that aren't there, jumping at shadows." Good. Fear creates mistakes. Mistakes create opportunities. It also makes them desperate, and desperate men take desperate actions. Thatcher gestured toward the German lines. Intelligence intercepted a signal from the 326th Volksgrenadier Division headquarters. They're assigning dedicated counter-sniper teams to this sector. Multiple teams. They want you dead, Garrison, badly enough to commit serious resources to making it happen. They can try. They will try. And eventually they'll succeed unless you stay ahead of them. Thatcher's voice was serious, carrying the weight of genuine concern. Keep evolving, keep changing. The moment you become predictable is the moment you die. That's not advice, Garrison. That's reality. After dark, Will sat in his foxhole and thought about Richter, about how close it had been, about how the secondary decoy, the paracord-pulled branch, had worked but only barely, about how the Germans were learning faster than he'd expected, adapting quicker than his original timeline had accounted for. He made notes in his notebook. Not kill counts this time, strategy notes, new ideas. Sound decoys. He could get a wire recorder from headquarters, record American voices, play them back from different positions to draw German attention. Mirror decoys. Position small fragments of broken glass to create fake scope glint in empty positions. Multiple, simultaneous positions. Set up 3 or 4 coffee cups at once. Force Germans to split their attention. Create confusion about which position was real. The coffee cup trick was still working, but coffee cups alone wouldn't be enough forever. The Germans were smart, professional, experienced. They were learning, which meant Will had to keep teaching them new lessons before they finished learning the old ones. Danny watched him write, young face serious in the firelight from their small cooking fire.
"You ever wonder if we're the bad guys?" he asked quietly.
"If tricking people and shooting them while they're focused on the trick is dishonorable or wrong or something." Will looked up from his notebook, met Danny's eyes directly. "You know what's dishonorable? Machine guns firing on advancing infantry who can't take cover. Artillery deliberately targeting medic stations marked with red crosses. Snipers shooting wounded men who are crawling back to their lines. The Germans do all that. We do all that. Everyone does all that. This war stopped being about honor a long time ago, Danny. Now it's just about surviving, about killing them before they kill you. But we're using deception. We're lying to them. We're using their training against them. There's a difference. We'll close the notebook, set it aside. They've been trained to look for obvious targets, to follow doctrine, to be methodical and patient and careful. All good things. All things that work in most combat situations. But I'm making those good things work against them instead of for them. That's not dishonorable, that's just war."
Danny thought about this, processing it with the seriousness of someone who was trying to build a moral framework that would let him live with what he was doing. Nodded slowly. 19 years old and learning that war didn't care about honor any more than it cared about justice or fairness or whether you made it home to see your family again. Will fell asleep thinking about the next day, about how to stay ahead of German adaptation, about whether 29 kills made him a hero or just another soldier doing mathematics with bullets and counting corpses instead of casualties. The notebook lay beside him in the darkness, filled with 29 entries that all followed the same format: date, time, range, conditions, result. 29 times the mathematics of death had worked out in his favor. Tomorrow he'd add more entries, more numbers.
More Germans who'd followed training straight into their graves.
And somewhere in the German lines, soldiers prepared for another day in the Hurtgen, unaware that some of them would never see another evening, would never write another letter home, would never do anything except die staring at rising steam, while a man they'd never seen wrote down the time and temperature and range of their deaths. The mathematics were simple, the mathematics were terrible, and the mathematics kept working, entry after entry, death after death, number after number. 29 down, 68 to go. Though he didn't know that final number yet. November 17th through 19th became focused escalation. Each day brought new challenges as German awareness spread through their units like a virus. Each challenge demanded new solutions, as the coffee cup trick alone proved insufficient against increasingly cautious enemies. Will's techniques multiplied and evolved.
The wire recorder he'd requisitioned from headquarters played captured recordings of American soldiers talking, their voices emanating from a speaker positioned 50 meters from Will's actual hide. Germans heard American conversations, shifted their attention toward the sounds, moved to investigate. Died investigating. Their training said voices meant soldiers. Their training didn't account for technology being weaponized. Mirrors created fake scope glint, small fragments of broken glass positioned to catch sunlight in patterns that resembled the telltale flash of rifle scopes. Germans saw the glint, thought they'd located an American sniper position, prepared to fire at the reflection, exposed themselves to Will's observation and fire from a completely different angle. Their training said scope glint meant sniper. Their training couldn't distinguish between real threats and manufactured ones. Triple cup setups forced German attention to split across multiple potential positions. 3 coffee cups steaming simultaneously, placed at different ranges and angles.
Germans tried determining which was real, which were decoys, spent mental energy on a puzzle that had no answer, because all 3 were decoys. While they concentrated on solving an unsolvable problem, Will observed from a 4th position they never considered. Kill 33. November 17th, 1100 hours. German NCO investigating recorded American voices moving cautiously toward the speaker, rifle ready. Never understood the sounds were technological ghosts until he became an actual ghost. Range 204 meters. Wind compensation, 2 clicks right. Temperature 21 degrees Fahrenheit. Result, center mass hit, immediate casualty. Kill 41. November 18th, 09:30 hours.
German sniper shooting at mirror reflection. So focused on what appeared to be enemy scope glint that he never noticed the real threat observing him from 197 meters away. Died, still staring at empty glass, still thinking he was hunting when he'd already been hunted. Kill 53. November 18th, 1500 hours. German officer with binoculars methodically scanning 3 cut positions, trying to establish pattern or priority, determine which represented real American presence. Spent 14 minutes on analysis. Never looked at the 4th position, the one Will actually occupied. Range 223 meters. Headshot. Officer died, still holding his binoculars, still trying to solve a puzzle designed to be unsolvable. Danny Kovac stopped asking questions about methodology or morality, just spotted targets efficiently, called wind conditions accurately, watched Will's sectors while the man from Montana transformed the Hurtgen forest into a mathematical exercise where every variable had been calculated and every answer was measured in German corpses. The notebook filled steadily, each entry following the same format: date, time, meteorological conditions, range, target behavior, compensation applied, result. The handwriting remained steady even as the numbers climbed. 30 kills, 40, 50, 60. By evening November 18th, Will had recorded 68 kills. 68 entries in a notebook that was starting to run out of blank pages. 68 reasons for the German army to fear coffee cups and mirrors and disembodied voices more than they feared conventional artillery. But the physical toll was accumulating with mathematical precision. 5 consecutive days of pre-dawn positioning, full daylight operations, evening displacement. 5 days of cold rations consumed without tasting them, and colder foxholes that provided inadequate shelter. 5 days of sleeping in 3-hour intervals and waking to count Germans instead of sheep, to calculate trajectories instead of dreams. Will's hands shook when he wasn't actively engaged in shooting. The tremors were slight but noticeable, a physical manifestation of exhaustion that no amount of willpower could completely suppress. His eyes burned constantly, vision occasionally blurring at the edges. He'd stopped tasting food 3 days ago. Everything had the same texture of sawdust and obligation. Water was rationed because canteens froze in the November cold, and resupply was sporadic, and drinking meant taking attention away from the scope, and attention was the difference between living and dying. "You need rest," Danny said on the evening of November 18th, his voice carrying genuine worry. They were cleaning weapons in the failing light, preparing for another night that would be too short and another dawn that would come too soon. "Real rest, Garrison. More than 3 hours. You're going to collapse if you keep this up." "Can't rest. Not yet." Will's voice had gone flat over the past days, mechanical, the voice of someone who'd learned to turn off everything except the parts absolutely necessary for killing. "Germans are still coming, still dying. Long as they're coming, I'm shooting." "You're going to collapse. You're barely functional now." "After I hit 90 kills, then I rest." "Why 90? Why is that the number?" "Because 99 isn't enough and 100 is too far." It wasn't logic. It was the kind of arbitrary arithmetic that combat created in men's minds when numbers stopped having any meaning except as marks toward a finish line that kept moving further away the closer you approached it. Danny didn't argue. 19 years old and already understanding that some decisions couldn't be changed by reason because they weren't made by reasonable minds in the first place. Combat did things to thinking, made it simultaneously sharper and more distorted, gave you perfect clarity about trajectories and wind compensation while destroying your ability to understand why 90 was different from 89 or 91. The morning of November 19th brought weather that matched Will's mental state. Grey sky pressing down like a physical weight, cold wind that cut through clothing and found skin underneath, temperature in the low 20s. The kind of day that made you wonder if warmth was a real phenomenon or just a pleasant delusion people shared to make winter bearable. Will was in position by 0500 hours, moving on autopilot now, his body going through practiced motions
while his mind floated somewhere between present necessity and past memory. Cup number 12, positioned on a destroyed concrete bunker, one of the German fortifications that had been overrun weeks earlier and now served as landmarks in the featureless forest. Steam rising in the pre-dawn darkness. His hide, 200 meters away, elevated slightly, offering sightlines across multiple German approach routes. Danny crouched beside him, binoculars ready, young face showing the strain of 5 days watching men die through magnified optics. "Wind's picking up," Danny reported, his voice professional despite fatigue. 7 to 9 miles per hour, variable direction. This is going to be difficult shooting. "Copy." Will made a notation in his notebook. His hands were steadier this morning, which was somehow worse than the shaking. The body adapting to stress by shutting down non-essential systems. Autopilot engaged, human parts suspended until further notice. Kill 69 came at 06:15. German patrol, 3 men, moving carefully through the ruins. The leader spotted Cup number 12, signaled his squad to halt with hand gestures, observed through binoculars for 18 minutes before deciding the target warranted investigation. Never made it within 50 meters of the Cup before Will's bullet found him at 212 meters. Wind compensation, 3 clicks left. Temperature, 22 degrees. Result, upper chest hit, casualty immediate. The other 2 Germans scattered according to standard doctrine. 1 man down meant sniper activity, and scattering meant survival. They'd been well trained. Will watched them go through his scope. Could have taken a second shot, chose not to. Conservation of ammunition was becoming critical. His pouches were running low. Conservation of position was equally important. Multiple shots from one location increased the probability of German counterfire. Let them run. Let them report. Let them spread the fear that the Kaffeesatzteufel was still hunting, still killing, still everywhere and nowhere. By noon on November 19th, Will had recorded 81 kills. The count was approaching his arbitrary target of 90, but the body was reaching its absolute physical limits. Vision blurred regularly now, requiring conscious effort to maintain focus through the scope. Hands cramped around the rifle, despite the cold that should have numbed them. Water had been depleted since yesterday morning, the canteens frozen solid, the ice unusable. Food was whatever Danny forced him to consume during brief breaks between kills. "Garrison," Danny's voice held more than worry now, actual fear. "You're in bad shape, real bad shape. We need to pull back, get you to the medical station. After 90. You said after 100 before. Changed my mind. 90's close enough. 90's achievable." It wasn't enough, would never be enough. But 90 was 9 kills closer than 100, and close felt possible in a way that far didn't anymore. At 12:15 hours, Will spotted a German officer through his scope. Older man, maybe 40, grey showing at his temples. Using binoculars to study Cup number 12 with the careful attention of someone who'd survived this long by being suspicious of everything. The officer was methodical, patient, Type B shooter elevated to command level. He observed the Cup for 14 minutes straight, clearly trying to determine if it represented genuine American presence or another trap in a sector that had become infamous for traps. The officer lowered his binoculars, not to shoot, not to advance, just to rub his hands together against the cold, frozen fingers that needed circulation, natural human gesture that every soldier in every winter war had made since warfare began. Human gesture that created approximately 3 seconds of exposure. Will fired. 218 meters, wind variable requiring split-second judgment. The bullet caught the officer in the temple. Instant death, the kind where the body doesn't even know it should fall down for a moment because the brain that controls such knowledge has stopped existing. Kill 89. Will's vision swam, grey at the edges, threatening to close in completely. He blinked hard, forced clarity through pure, stubborn will. The Springfield felt heavier than it should, physics unchanged but exhaustion making everything weigh more than the sum of its parts. "That's enough for today," Danny said, his voice carrying finality now, not a suggestion, a declaration. "Garrison, you're done. You can't even see straight. We're pulling back. That's not negotiable. 9 more. Just 9 more. You can barely hold the goddamn rifle. 9 more. Danny opened his mouth to argue further, closed it, recognized the look in Will's eyes, the look that said arguments were wasted breath because the decision had been made somewhere beyond logic or reason or self-preservation, made in whatever part of the mind governed things like completing arbitrary numbers and proving points to ghosts. The afternoon passed in a haze of grey light and greyer consciousness. Will killed 2 more Germans, both Type A shooters, quick and careless and dead at ranges he recorded mechanically in his notebook. 91 kills total. Then the forest went quiet. No more targets presenting themselves. No more Germans willing to expose themselves to the sector where the Kaffeesatzteufel hunted. Either word had spread faster than anticipated, or probability had finally swung against him, or God had decided 91 was the number where killing stopped for the day. Will sat behind his rifle, exhausted beyond any measure he'd previously understood existed. 9 kills short of an arbitrary number that meant nothing except everything to a mind that had stopped processing anything except mathematics and necessity. At 1400 hours, movement in his scope. Germans setting up a machine gun position. 3 men working with professional efficiency. MG-42, the finest machine gun in any army. 1,200 rounds per minute, capable of turning infantry advances into slaughter. They were positioning it to cover the American advance route, the same route Will knew the 28th Infantry Division would use tomorrow morning when they pushed forward again, in the endless grinding battle to take forest that wasn't worth the blood being spent to capture it. That machine gun would kill 40 Americans minimum, probably more. Would devastate an entire company before artillery could silence it. Will's radio crackled. Captain Thatcher's voice, distant and crackling with static. "Garrison, we're tracking German activity in your sector. Machine gun emplacement. Can you confirm visual?" "Confirmed. 3-man crew, MG-42. Position will dominate tomorrow's advance route. Pull back. We'll hit them with artillery." Will checked his watch. 1400 hours. Artillery response time is 20 minutes minimum. They'll be operational in 10. They'll test fire the weapon, adjust fields of fire, be ready to engage targets in less than 15 minutes. Then pull back, and we'll deal with it tomorrow before the advance. By tomorrow they'll have killed 40 of our men before artillery can respond. I can stop it now. Prevent those casualties. Garrison. I can stop it now, sir. Silence on the radio. Static and distant artillery, and the sound of Thatcher thinking through options that all led to bad outcomes. Then his voice, careful and measured. "You have ammunition remaining?" Will checked his pouches methodically. 1 round. Single M2 armor-piercing cartridge. The last round from a box he'd opened 6 days ago when the coffee cup trick was just an untested theory instead of a legend that would be studied in military academies for decades. 1 round, Will reported. "Jesus Christ, Garrison, you can't stop 3 men with 1 bullet. That's not possible." Through his scope, Will studied the machine gun position. Range approximately 264 meters, longest shot he'd attempted in 6 days of shooting. Wind gusting 8 to 12 miles per hour from variable directions. Atmospheric chaos that made precision nearly impossible. Temperature, 23 degrees. Light fading as 1400 hours. In November, Germany meant the sun was already declining toward an early sunset. The 3 Germans worked steadily, unaware they were being observed. The gunner testing the traverse mechanism. The loader arranging ammunition belts with careful attention to detail. The team leader supervising, occasionally glancing toward the American lines, calculating fields of fire. Will's crosshairs moved between targets. The gunner, the loader, the team leader. 1 bullet, 3 men. Impossible mathematics. His crosshairs drifted past the men to something beside them. The ammunition box. 40 centimeters of linked 7.92 millimeter rounds. Metal container with thin walls designed for portability rather than protection. The M2 armor-piercing round in Will's chamber could penetrate that metal. The friction and heat of penetration would detonate rounds inside the container. Not all of them. Physics and probability didn't work that cleanly, but some. Enough to create secondary detonations. Enough to kill 3 men positioned in close proximity to the explosion. The solution crystallized with perfect clarity, cutting through exhaustion and blurred vision with the kind of certainty that comes from understanding physics and desperation in equal measure. He wasn't shooting the men, he was shooting their ammunition. "Garrison?" Thatcher's voice on the radio. "What are you doing?" "Math, sir, just math." Will began the final calculations of his 6-day operation. Bullet drop at 264 meters, approximately 110 inches. Wind drift in variable conditions, 3 feet lateral movement, but variable, requiring averaging of observations at multiple ranges. Cold barrel after 40 minutes without firing. Slight velocity increase, translating to approximately 2-inch higher impact point. Elevation angle, 7 degrees positive, affecting trajectory. Temperature affecting powder burn rate and bullet performance. Humidity from recent rain, affecting air density. Montana mathematics, the kind his father had taught him when calculating 400-yard shots on coyotes in 30 below weather, where missed shots meant the family didn't eat. The kind that didn't come from field manuals, but from understanding that physics was just nature's way of keeping score. And if you understood the rules deeply enough, you could win games nobody else knew how to play. 1 click up on the scope, 1 click left for wind compensation. Through the scope, the German team leader stepped back from the machine gun, satisfied with their setup. Gestured to the gunner, who settled behind the weapon, hands finding the grips naturally, body positioning itself for sustained fire. Testing traverse, getting comfortable, preparing for the killing that would happen tomorrow morning. Will's finger found the trigger for the 97th and final time. Applied pressure, smooth, steady. The compressed trigger pull he'd learned in Montana, 1.5 seconds instead of the regulation 3 to 4, another modification to doctrine that had kept him alive when following rules would have killed him. His father's voice echoed across 8 years and 4,000 miles, and a lifetime of choices that had led to this exact moment. Let them come to you, son. Understand what they want. Give it to them. Then kill them while they're looking the wrong direction. Frank Delaney's face flickered behind his eyes one final time. Frank, who'd graduated first at Fort Benning. Frank, who'd died at Anzio. Frank, who should have been the one becoming a legend, instead of decomposing in Italian mud, while Will Garrison became something the Germans would tell stories about. This one's for you, Frank. For all of us who made it when you didn't. The Springfield kicked against his shoulder. The sound lost itself instantly in distant artillery, the recoil as familiar as breathing. Will kept his eye to the scope, watching, waiting. 2.3 seconds. The span between intention and result, between mathematics and reality, between one last bullet and the difference between American boys going home or going into graves. The M2 armor-piercing round struck the ammunition box 3 inches left of center. For a microsecond that stretched into subjective eternity, nothing happened. Physics and chemistry negotiated with each other in the language of heat and friction and sudden catastrophic energy transfer. The bullet penetrated the thin metal container. Friction generated heat. Heat met chemical propellant in linked cartridges. Propellant detonated. Then the negotiation ended and the explosion began. The ammunition box erupted in a sharp, violent detonation as linked rounds cooked off in rapid succession. The metal container fragmented into shrapnel, traveling at velocities that made survival impossible for anyone within the blast radius. The gunner, positioned closest to the ammunition, caught the worst of it. The loader, crouched beside the gun, took the second worst. The team leader, supervising from 3 meters away, received the third worst. All 3 men died before their nervous systems could process pain signals, because nervous systems require functional nervous tissue, and shrapnel doesn't negotiate with biology. The MG-42, that magnificent weapon, twisted and warped beyond any possibility of repair, destroyed by the very ammunition it was designed to fire. Irony rendered in torn metal. Through the scope, Will watched the 3 Germans die. Kill 95, kill 96, kill 97. He lowered the rifle slowly, carefully, with movements that felt disconnected from intention. His hands didn't shake, didn't feel much of anything, just empty, used up, finished, like a machine that had completed its programmed function and was awaiting new instructions that would never come. Reached for his notebook one final time, made the last entry in handwriting that still didn't waver despite everything. November 19, 14:43 hours. Kills number 95, 96, 97. Range 264 meters. Wind variable 8 to 12 miles per hour. Temperature 23 Fahrenheit. Target ammunition box. Secondary explosions achieved. Result explosion. 3 killed in action. Weapon destroyed beyond recovery. Mission complete. Close the notebook. Put it in his pocket where it would remain for the next 49 years. Sat there for a moment that stretched into minutes, Springfield across his lap, looking at 3 bodies sprawled around destroyed machinery 264 meters away. 97 men in 6 days. The number sat in his mind like a gravestone, heavy, permanent, inescapable, a weight that would follow him through every remaining day of his life. Garrison? Danny's voice seemed to come from very far away. Holy shit, you actually did it. You actually made that shot. Yeah. Will's voice didn't sound like his own voice anymore. Sounded like someone else speaking through his mouth. Someone tired, someone empty, someone who'd just proven you could kill 97 men with coffee cups and clever thinking and 1 Springfield rifle, serial number 3172418. We need to move. Get back to our lines. Yeah. But Will didn't move immediately. Just sat there staring at nothing visible, counting to 97 over and over in his head, because that was the number now. That was the number that would define him. 97 Germans who'd followed training and died for it. 97 men who'd never see another morning. 97 families who would receive telegrams that would destroy their worlds. Garrison, Danny's hand on his shoulder, physical and insistent. Come on, Sarge, we have to move. 12 miles back to lines. We need to start now while there's still light. Will stood finally, picked up his rifle, checked his ammunition pouches with automatic thoroughness. Empty, every round expended, every bullet accounted for in German corpses. Nothing left except the walk home through 12 miles of contested forest. 12 miles that should have been impossible for a man in Will's condition. Should have been a death sentence. Should have ended with his body found frozen in the forest, another casualty of the Hurtgen's endless appetite. Should have been. But should have been didn't mean much anymore. Not after 6 days of making the impossible happen 97 times through nothing but understanding and patience and ruthless application of physics to human targets. They moved out at 1500 hours, Will carrying his empty Springfield, Danny carrying equipment and worry in equal measure. The forest closed around them like a fist, grey and cold and infinite, and utterly indifferent to whether they lived or died. By 1600 hours, Will's vision was blurring regularly, the edges of his visual field going grey and threatening to close in completely. By 1700, his hands were shaking with something that went beyond cold, beyond exhaustion, into territory that had physiological names like hypothermia and systemic shock. By 1800, he was stumbling over terrain he should have been able to navigate, his sense of balance failing as his body began shutting down non-essential systems to preserve core functions. Danny tried to help, offering his shoulder for support. Will waved him off with stubborn Montana pride, kept walking through pure momentum, 1 foot in front of the other. Stubbornness applied to geography, refusal to quit applied to biology that was screaming for him to lie down and rest and let the cold take him, because cold death was supposed to be peaceful, like falling asleep. By 1900 hours, hypothermia was setting in with serious intent. The kind that made you think you were warm when you were freezing, made you want to remove clothing because your confused nervous system interpreted cold as heat, made dying seem like the most reasonable decision in the world, the logical conclusion to a problem that had become too complicated to solve. Will kept walking, started seeing things that weren't there, his oxygen-deprived brain manufacturing presences from memory and guilt. Frank Delaney walked beside him, uniform impossibly clean, face impossibly young, saying things about Anzio and sacrifice and turns that ended early and turns that had to continue. His father appeared too, Montana winter somehow transplanted to German forest, saying something about prey and hunting, and knowing when to stop being a hunter and start being a survivor. Will ignored them both, kept walking, counting steps because counting kept the mind occupied. Counting to 97 over and over, because that number had become a mantra, a prayer, a curse. 2,200 hours. 9 hours after the final shot. Will Garrison stumbled into American lines, collapsed at the checkpoint before he could identify himself, barely conscious, his body finally acknowledging that it had reached and exceeded every possible limit. Medics surrounded him instantly, professionals moving with practiced efficiency. Captain Thatcher appeared from somewhere, demanding information, getting fragments from Danny about 97 kills and coffee cups and an impossible shot at 264 meters. Will's first words, slurred by hypothermia and exhaustion, and the simple fact that his brain was no longer processing language correctly. Need more ammunition. Germans are learning the coffee trick, have to change tactics. Thatcher's response, his voice carrying something that might have been awe or horror or both. It's over, Garrison. You're going home. You're done fighting for a while. Will tried to argue, couldn't form the words. The darkness came up to meet him and he let it happen, because fighting everything all the time was exhausting, and maybe, for just a little while, he could stop fighting and let someone else handle the mathematics. Last thought before unconsciousness claimed him. Frank, I finished it. For you, for all of us. Then nothing but darkness and distant voices saying medical terminology he didn't understand, and the sensation of being carried, and blankets being piled on, and warmth that felt like fire after 6 days of cold. Will woke 36 hours later in a medical tent that smelled like disinfectant and gangrene, and death imperfectly cleaned. IV in his arm, delivering fluids his body desperately needed. Blankets piled 6 deep, so many he could barely move under their weight. Captain Thatcher sitting beside the cot, reading after-action reports, looking tired in the way that command made men tired. "Welcome back," Thatcher said, setting aside the reports. "Medics weren't sure you'd make it. Severe hypothermia, dehydration, malnutrition, exhaustion, infected wounds we didn't even know you had. You're either incredibly lucky or incredibly stubborn." Will's throat was dry, voice coming out as a croak. "How long?" 36 hours. You've been unconscious the entire time. Medics had to force fluids and nutrients. Your body was shutting down." Germans? Scattered, demoralized. Your 6-day operation killed 97 confirmed, but the psychological impact was worse than the raw casualties. Thatcher leaned forward, his voice carrying professional respect. "Prisoners we've interrogated say whole companies are refusing to operate in sectors where the Kaffeesatzteufel hunts. They think you're supernatural, think you can be everywhere at once. Some are claiming you're already dead, that you're literally a ghost, that bullets can't kill you because you're not actually alive. Just Montana tactics. Montana tactics just changed how this army thinks about snipers and psychological warfare." Thatcher picked up another report. "Intelligence wants to interview you extensively. Training Command wants to document your methods in detail. First Army wants to distribute your techniques as standard doctrine for all sniper sections." "Can they wait? I'm tired." "They can wait. They'll have to." Thatcher stood preparing to leave. "Get some rest, Garrison. Real rest. The war will still be here when you wake up. It's not going anywhere." But Thatcher was wrong about one thing. Not about the war still being there. That part was accurate. The war would continue with or without Will Garrison. Wrong about rest. Because when Will closed his eyes, he saw 97 faces. 97 Germans, staring at coffee cups in their final moments. 97 men who'd followed training straight into graves. He saw them every time he closed his eyes for the rest of the war. Saw them every time he closed his eyes for the rest of his life. The war would eventually end. The faces never would. The war continued without Will Garrison for 2 weeks while he recovered in the medical station, his body slowly rebuilding reserves that had been depleted past any reasonable point. Then it continued with him for 6 more months until Germany surrendered in May 1945, and everyone went home to figure out how to be human again after years of practicing being something else. Will's final count by war's end: 147 confirmed kills. Never used the coffee cup trick again after November 19th. The Germans had learned. Word had spread through their entire army like a virus, changing doctrine, altering training, making every coffee cup suspect. The trick only worked when the enemy didn't know it existed, when surprise and psychology could be weaponized. Once they understood the pattern stopped working. But the principle remained valid. Use enemy training against them. Stay unpredictable. Think like a hunter from Montana instead of a soldier from a manual. Keep evolving faster than the enemy could adapt. Other innovations followed over those final 6 months. Sound recordings of American soldiers played through speakers positioned away from Will's actual location. Germans investigated the voices and died investigating. Mirrors creating fake scope glint in empty positions. Germans fired at reflections and exposed themselves to real fire. Dummy sniper hides constructed with obvious mistakes in camouflage that drew German attention, while Will operated from properly concealed positions. The notebook filled with entries, 147 of them by the time Germany surrendered, each following the same format: date, time, meteorological conditions, range, target behavior, result. 147 times the mathematics of death worked in Will's favor. 147 reasons the Germans started calling American snipers ghosts. On November 20th morning, something significant happened that Will would only learn about years later from declassified German documents. Danny Kovac's hand suddenly gripped Will's arm where he lay recovering, pulling him partially back to consciousness. "Garrison, you need to hear this. German radio traffic we intercepted." Through the captured German radio that intelligence had rigged in the medical tent, a voice spoke with crisp command authority. Danny translated haltingly, his German adequate but not fluent. "All units, Sector 47 and adjacent. Immediate effect." The voice paused, static crackling. "Assume every visible American position is deliberate deception. Every sign of enemy presence is to be treated as potential trap. Minimum 2-hour observation period required before any engagement with suspected American positions." Another pause, more static. Then the order that made Danny's eyes go wide. "Counter-sniper operations in affected sectors are suspended until further notice, pending tactical analysis of American deception methodologies." Will process this through the fog of pain medication and exhaustion. Suspended? They're ordering their snipers to stop hunting you. Danny's voice carried disbelief. You've actually paralyzed them, made an entire German division change how they fight. That was the moment Will understood he'd accomplished something unprecedented. Not just killed Germans, not just achieved a high body count. He'd made an entire enemy formation alter their fundamental tactical approach, made them afraid to do their jobs, made them second-guess every observation, every target, every decision, made them fight ghosts instead of Americans. The psychological impact would ripple through German forces for the remainder of the war. Units that had never encountered Will personally would refuse to operate normally because they'd heard the stories. Soldiers would hesitate at crucial moments, wondering if what they were seeing was real or another trap. The Kaffeesatzteufel would become legend, myth, something that existed in the space between reality and nightmare, all because of 97 kills and 6 days of making coffee cups into weapons. Montana, November 1945. Will Garrison returned to Cascade Ridge, population still 421, though several faces were missing from the ones he'd known before the war. Returned to ranching, returned to weather that would kill a man who didn't respect it.
Returned to hunting coyotes instead of Germans, though he found he didn't enjoy hunting anymore. Found that putting crosshairs on living things made his hands shake in ways they never had during the war. Never talked about the war. Not to neighbors who asked carefully worded questions. Not to family who could see something had changed but didn't know how to ask about it. Not to anyone who wanted to hear stories about the coffee cup devil and the 97 Germans. May 1946. Billings Gazette sent a reporter. Young man, fresh from journalism school, enthusiastic about getting the real story behind the rumors he'd heard, full of questions about tactics and kills and whether the stories were exaggerated. "Is it true?" the reporter asked, notepad ready, pencil poised. "Did you really kill 97 Germans in 6 days using coffee cups?" Will thought about how to answer. Thought about 97 faces he saw every night when he tried to sleep. 97 entries in a notebook hidden in a footlocker he never opened. 97 times he'd proven that understanding psychology mattered more than marksmanship. Germans were good soldiers, he finally said, choosing words carefully. Brave, well-trained, professional. They followed their doctrine because their doctrine usually worked, usually kept them alive. Sometimes the best way to defeat good training is to use it backwards. Make them think they see what they expect. Make them focus on what you want them to focus on. Then be somewhere else when they act on that expectation. But the coffee cups specifically, just bait, could have been anything. Helmets, canteens, cigarette smoke. The specific bait wasn't important. Understanding that good soldiers follow predictable patterns, that's what mattered. And patterns can be weaponized if you're creative enough and ruthless enough to actually do it. The reporter wanted more. Wanted details and drama and hero stories he could sell to readers who wanted the war to be simple and heroic. Will declined politely but firmly. Said he had cattle to check on. Said the past was past and there wasn't much point dwelling on it. Said he'd appreciate it if the Gazette didn't make a big deal about ancient history that most people had already forgotten. The Gazette published one paragraph buried on page 7. Local veteran returns home, served with distinction in European theatre, resuming family ranching operations. Most neighbors never knew what he'd done, never knew about the 97 or the 147 or the way German soldiers still told stories about the Kaffeesatzteufel decades later in bars and veterans' halls. Will preferred it that way. Preferred anonymity, preferred being just another rancher dealing with cattle and weather and the slow accumulation of years. Married Helen Mackenzie in 1947. Good woman from a neighboring ranch. She'd lost a brother at Normandy and understood about not asking questions about the war. 3 children followed, 2 sons, 1 daughter, 6 grandchildren eventually. Life measured in cattle births and seasonal migrations and school plays and graduations instead of kills and ranges and wind compensation. His children asked once about the war, the way children do when they learn their father did something significant before they existed. Will said he'd been a soldier, did his job, came home. Nothing more to tell, really. They accepted this because children accept what parents tell them, at least until they're old enough to know better. They found the footlocker after he died, found the notebook with its 147 entries, found the explanation for why their father sometimes woke at night, counting softly in what they later learned was German. Found the reason he never drank coffee from tin cups, always insisted on ceramic mugs, got physically uncomfortable when he saw steam rising from metal containers. Found the explanation for why he always positioned himself in rooms where he could see all exits, why he never sat with his back to windows, why he unconsciously calculated ranges to distant objects even decades after the war ended. Found the reason that on November 19th every year, without fail, their father would go silent and distant, would spend the entire day checking fence line alone, would come home after dark, looking older and more tired than any day's physical work could make him. The war had ended in 1945. For Will Garrison, November 19th never ended, just repeated annually, like a liturgical calendar marking religious observance. 97 times over every November 19th for 48 years.
Every German face he'd seen through a scope. Every man who died thinking about coffee instead of bullets. Every family destroyed by a telegram. Every variation of killed in action that meant someone's world ended while someone else's continued. He carried them all. Quiet. Private. The way Montana men carried weight that couldn't be shared. Because talking about weight didn't make it lighter, just made other people uncomfortable with knowledge they didn't know how to process. Until August 1993, when his heart gave out while checking fence line and he finally stopped carrying anything. His last words to Helen, spoken in the ambulance while his heart rhythm became increasingly erratic. Tell them it was necessary. All of it. Tell them I did what had to be done. She nodded, held his hand, didn't tell him that necessary and right weren't always the same thing, that history would judge whether 97 deaths in 6 days constituted heroism or something else that didn't have a comfortable name. He died thinking they were the same thing. Maybe that was mercy. Maybe that was the only way men like Will Garrison could live with what they'd done, by believing absolutely that it had been necessary, that there had been no other choice, that the mathematics had worked out correctly, even when the mathematics involved human lives. Died August 1993, 72 years old. Heart attack while checking fence line. Quick and relatively painless, the kind of death he would have chosen if given the choice. Billings Gazette obituary. 4 paragraphs about family and community involvement and ranching operations. 1 paragraph about military service. Served with distinction in European theatre, World War II. 28th Infantry Division, multiple commendations. No mention of 97 kills in 6 days. No mention of coffee cups becoming weapons. No mention of forcing an entire German division to change tactical doctrine. No mention of the psychological warfare that made him more feared than entire artillery battalions. Most neighbors never knew. The few who did know never talked about it. Montana had a culture of privacy about such things, understanding that some men did terrible, necessary things during wars and then came home and tried to be normal again, and the least their communities could do was let them try without constant reminders of what they'd been. 2011. Will's grandson, cleaning out the barn after his grandmother's funeral, found a footlocker hidden under 66 years of accumulated ranch equipment. Locked. Rusted. The kind of thing that gets pushed to the back and forgotten as newer equipment takes priority. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth against moisture, Springfield 03A4 rifle, serial number 3172418, still functional. Ballistics testing conducted later that year showed sub-MOA accuracy, even after 6 decades. 147 rounds through that barrel during the war, and the weapon still shot true. Notebook, 147 entries, each following the same format. Date, time, range, conditions, result, handwriting never wavering across entries spanning from November 1944 to May 1945. Numbers climbing steadily from 1 to 147. 3 tin cups, dented, discolored, olive drab paint mostly gone. Wire loops still attached through holes drilled with care. Medal of Honor, awarded posthumously in 1997, 4 years after Will's death. Family had kept it private at his request, Will specifically stating he didn't want public recognition, didn't want parades or ceremonies or anything that drew attention. Just wanted to be remembered as a rancher who'd done his duty and come home. The grandson donated everything to preserve history. Rifle to Montana Historical Society. Notebook to National Infantry Museum at Fort Benning, where new snipers could study the methodologies. Medal of Honor to Montana Veterans Memorial, where it joined other decorations from other quiet men who'd done terrible, necessary things and never talked about them. The coffee cups scattered to different locations. One went with the rifle to Montana, one went with the notebook to Fort Benning. One disappeared into a private collection somewhere, bought by a collector who understood what it represented, but probably didn't understand the weight it carried. Present day, Montana Historical Society, Helena, Montana. Glass display case in the World War II section, between exhibits about Montana's industrial contribution to the war effort and the internment of Japanese Americans. Single tin cup. Dented. olive drab paint mostly gone, showing bare metal underneath. Wire loop, rusted, but still intact. No explanation card beyond the basics. Tin cup, US Army issue, circa 1944.
Part of the William Garrison collection. Most visitors walk past without seeing it, just another piece of military equipment from a war that ended 70 years ago. Nothing special. Nothing that commands attention in an exhibit full of more dramatic items, uniforms, weapons, propaganda posters. But sometimes an elderly veteran pauses, stares at the cup with recognition that transcends explanation, whispers to a grandson or granddaughter about 97 Germans and 6 days, and the simplest tricks being the deadliest. The grandson or granddaughter usually doesn't understand, just sees an old cup, just hears an old story from an old war that seems increasingly distant in a world that's moved on to different wars and different problems and different ways of counting casualties. But the veteran understands that cup represents something his generation knew but couldn't always articulate, that innovation matters more than firepower, that understanding psychology defeats superior equipment, that mind beats muscle when mind is applied with sufficient ruthlessness and creativity, understands that somewhere between the wars fought in history books and the wars fought in reality, there were men like Will Garrison who figured out how to win by changing the rules instead of following them. The veteran stands there briefly, paying respects to ingenuity and ruthlessness and the kind of thinking that saves lives by taking them first, then moves on to other exhibits, back to a world where coffee cups are just coffee cups and the only thing they kill is morning drowsiness. The cup remains in its case, waiting for the next person who'll understand what it represents. In climate-controlled archives at Fort Benning, Georgia, Will Garrison's notebook waits in a preservation box. 147 entries. Young officers study it in sniper courses, analyzing methodologies and psychological warfare application. The techniques have evolved, technology has changed, weapons have improved, surveillance has become digital, but the principles remain valid. Understand your enemy's training. Use that training against them. Stay unpredictable. Think differently than doctrine prescribes. Make the enemy focus on what you want them to focus on, then kill them while they're looking the wrong direction. The last entry in the notebook, written in Montana in 1946, after all the other entries, after the war ended, after Will came home and tried to process what he'd done. War taught me the deadliest weapon isn't the rifle you carry, but the mind that directs it. Make the enemy see what you want them to see. Be where they don't expect you. 97 men stared at rising steam in their final moments, never realizing they watched their own death. 1 cup of coffee, 6 days, 147 by war's end. The simplest tricks are always the deadliest. W. Garrison, Montana, 1946. Simple words for a simple truth that had taken 147 lives to prove. The notebook closes. The archives preserve it. And somewhere, young soldiers learn that sometimes the most effective weapon is the one nobody expects. The one that doesn't appear in any manual, the one that requires thinking instead of just following orders. Will Garrison's legacy, not just 147 kills, but the understanding that warfare isn't just about who has better equipment or more soldiers or superior training. It's about who can think differently, who can adapt faster, who can turn enemy strengths into fatal weaknesses, about who understands that in the end, war is mathematics and psychology combined, and the person who understands both will always defeat the person who only understands one. 97 kills in 6 days, with nothing but coffee cups and clever thinking, proved that principle beyond any possible doubt. The question Will Garrison could never answer, the question that followed him through 48 years of November 19th, was whether proving that principle was worth the cost of proving it. He died thinking it was necessary. History would decide if he was right.